The laughter came first, sharp and sudden, before Ren even understood why. She stood near the long table of punch glasses, holding a tray she had not asked to hold, wearing a dress that had been turned twice and mended 3 times. A woman in blue silk pointed at the hem, whispering to her friend, and the whisper spread through the room the way fire spreads through dry grass. Within a minute, half the hall was looking at her. Someone laughed out loud. Someone else copied the sound, softer, crueler, as if laughter could be borrowed and passed hand to hand like a coin. Ren did not look down at the dress. She had learned long ago that looking down only told the room it had won. She kept her chin level and her eyes on the chandelier above the dance floor, counting the candles instead of the stairs. 6 years ago she would have run from a room like this. 6 years ago she had never needed to enter a room like this at all. But her father's debts had eaten the family home, the carriage, the servants, and finally the good opinion of everyone who used to call themselves friends. Now she worked for a seamstress named Old Marta, and tonight she was only here because Marta's knee had failed her, and someone had to deliver the altered gloves to Lady Pemberton before the dancing began. She should have left the moment the gloves were delivered. She stayed 1 minute too long, and 1 minute was enough. The girl in blue silk stepped closer, smiling with all her teeth. Her name was Cordelia Ashby, and she had once sat 2 rows behind Ren in a schoolroom neither of them would admit to remembering. "Is that dress older than you, Miss Ashford?" Cordelia said, loud enough for the nearest circle of guests to hear. "I believe I saw my grandmother wear something like it, before she passed, of course." The circle laughed. Ren felt the heat rise in her face, the old humiliating heat that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "It was my mother's," Ren said, flat, steady, not an apology. "How touching," Cordelia said, and turned to her friends as if a punchline had been delivered. Ren set the tray down before her hands could betray her by shaking. She reached to steady a glass that had tipped dangerously close to the table's edge, and in doing so, her glove slipped from her wrist and fell to the floor. She bent to retrieve it. When she rose, the ring on her right hand caught the candlelight, a small garnet stone, deep red, set in gold gone soft and dark with age. It was the one thing the creditors had never found because she never let it leave her hand, not even to sleep. Across the room, a man who had said perhaps 4 sentences all evening went very still. He was tall, dressed in black that fit too well to be borrowed and too plain to be careless, and he had spent the last hour being introduced to daughters he had no intention of marrying. His name was Julian Ashcombe, Duke of Renmere, and the room had been watching him almost as closely as it now watched Ren, though for entirely different reasons. Every mother in the hall wanted his attention. He had given none of them more than a nod. He was not looking at Ren's dress. He had barely registered the dress at all. He was looking at her hand and the ring on it, and something behind his eyes shifted the way a locked door shifts when someone tries the handle from the other side. He had seen that ring before, not one like it, that one. Julian set down his own glass, untouched, and crossed the room before he had decided to move. Cordelia saw him coming and brightened instantly, certain the Duke of Renmere was finally about to rescue the evening by paying attention to someone worth his notice. She arranged her face into something practiced and pretty. He walked past her without seeing her at all. He stopped in front of Ren, close enough that the laughter around them faltered into confused silence, the way a fire gutters when the wind changes direction. Ren looked up at him, wary, bracing for one more insult dressed up as politeness. She had met men like this before, titled men who thought a compliment about a woman's eyes gave them the right to say whatever they liked about everything else. "Your ring," Julian said. His voice was low, controlled, the voice of a man who did not often let people hear what he was actually feeling. "Where did you get it?" Not the dress, not her name, not a single word about the mockery still hanging in the air like smoke. Ren's hand closed instinctively around the ring, protective, the way she had held it every day for 6 years. "It was my mother's," she said again, this time to him alone, and something in her tone dared him to make a joke of it the way Cordelia had. He did not laugh. He did not even smile. He looked at the ring the way a man looks at a ghost he has spent years pretending he does not believe in. "What was your mother's name?" he asked. The question landed strangely in a room built for smaller talk than this. Around them, guests had begun to notice that the Duke of Renmere, who spoke to no one, was now speaking only to the seamstress's girl in the mended dress, and the noise of the room dropped by half, ears straining. Wren felt the danger in the silence before she understood its shape. She did not know this man. She did not know why a duke would care about a dead woman's name, or why his jaw had tightened like he was holding something back with both hands. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked instead of answering. For a moment he looked as though he might tell her everything, right there, in front of a hall full of people who had been laughing at her 10 minutes earlier. She saw it cross his face, the urge to speak, and then the older, colder habit of silence closing back over it like a lid. "It doesn't," he said, which was clearly a lie, and clearly one they both recognized as a lie the instant it left his mouth. He gave her a short bow, precise and formal, the kind he probably gave to duchesses and diplomats. Then he turned and walked straight through the crowd toward the door, ignoring 3 separate attempts by mothers to intercept him with their daughters. He did not look back. Wren stood holding the empty tray, her fallen glove still in her other hand, the ring warm now from how tightly she had gripped it. The room's attention slowly drifted away from her, disappointed that nothing more scandalous had happened, already inventing a story where nothing more scandalous was needed. Cordelia appeared at her elbow, her smile gone thin and sour. "What did you say to him?" "Nothing," Wren said, which was almost true. "He never speaks to anyone," Cordelia pressed. "He didn't even look at me." Wren did not answer. She was still watching the door the Duke of Renmere had walked through, replaying the exact moment his voice had changed from bored to something else entirely. Not attraction, not pity, something closer to fear, though she could not say why a duke would fear a ring that belonged to a dead seamstress's daughter. She gathered the tray, retrieved the last of the gloves for delivery, and left the assembly as quickly as she could without running. Outside, the night air was cold enough to sting, and she pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, grateful for once that the dress drew no eyes in the dark. She did not know, walking home along the unlit road back to Marta's shop, that Julian Ashcombe had not gone home at all. He had gone directly to his secretary, a quiet, careful man named Edmund Farr who had served the Renmere household for 11 years and had learned never to ask why the Duke wanted the things he wanted. "Find out who she is," Julian said, standing in the dark of his own carriage, still seeing the garnet ring every time he closed his eyes. "The girl in the gray dress. Find her name, her family, everything." "Might I ask why, Your Grace?" Julian did not answer for a long moment. Outside the carriage window, the lights of the assembly hall faded behind them, and with it, the sound of laughter that had followed a girl he had never met before tonight. "Because I think I have owed her family a debt for 6 years, he said finally, "and I did not know it until an hour ago." Edmund Farr, who had learned never to ask twice, simply nodded and made a note in the small leather book he carried everywhere. Neither of them said another word for the rest of the ride home, but Julian did not sleep that night. He sat by the fire in his study with an old letter pulled from the bottom of a locked drawer, a letter he had not read in 6 years, because reading it had always felt like touching a wound before it healed. Tonight he read it twice. The letter was signed with a name he now recognized. A name that matched, he was almost certain, the same face that had looked up at him tonight with a ring on her finger and no idea at all of what that ring meant to the man standing in front of her. Somewhere across the city, Wren reached her small room above Marta's shop, lit a single candle, and looked at the ring on her hand the way she looked at it every night. a small, stubborn piece of a life she had lost and never quite finished grieving. She had no way of knowing that a duke sat awake because of it, staring into a fire with an old letter in his hands, about to unravel a secret that had been waiting 6 years for someone to notice a girl in a tattered dress. The note arrived 3 days later, tucked under the shop door so quietly that Wren almost swept it away with the morning dust before she noticed the seal. It was plain paper, no crest, no signature, only a few lines in a hand that had clearly tried to look ordinary and failed at it completely. The penmanship was too controlled, too deliberate, the kind of writing that belonged to someone used to being obeyed. You are requested to call at Wrenmere House on Thursday, at 3 in the afternoon, regarding a matter of some delicacy concerning your late mother. Wren read it 4 times before she let herself believe the words were real. Her first thought was fear, plain and immediate. In her experience, matters of delicacy concerning dead parents usually meant debts nobody had mentioned before, hidden creditors who waited years to strike when a family was too poor to fight back. She had spent 6 years paying for mistakes that were never hers to begin with, and she had no intention of adding a duke's debt collectors to the list. Her second thought, quieter and more stubborn than the first, was the memory of his face in that crowded hall, the stillness in it, the way he had asked about the ring like the question cost him something. She folded the note and put it in the drawer where she kept her mother's few remaining letters, and she told herself she was not going to Wrenmere House on Thursday. By Wednesday night, she had told herself this so many times that she no longer believed it. "You are going to get yourself in trouble," old Marta said, watching Wren pin a hem with hands that were not paying proper attention to the work. Marta was 61 years old, half blind in one eye, and sharper than most people twice her age with 2 good eyes. She had taken Wren in when no one else would hire a girl with a ruined family name, and she considered it her right to say whatever she liked about Wren's decisions ever since. "I'm only going to hear what he has to say," Wren said. "Dukes do not send notes to seamstresses' girls to discuss the weather." Marta bit off a thread with her teeth, an old habit Wren had given up trying to correct. "Either he wants something from you or he owes you something. Both are dangerous. Only one is worth the walk." Wren did not answer, because she did not know which one it was, and not knowing was the exact reason she could not stop thinking about it. Thursday came gray and cold, the kind of English afternoon that could not decide whether to rain. Wren wore her second-best dress, which was still not very good, and walked the 2 miles to Wrenmere House on foot because she could not afford a hired carriage and would not have known how to explain one to Marta if she had. The house itself nearly stopped her at the gate. She had grown up in a fine home once, before everything was sold, but nothing in her memory matched the size of Wrenmere House, its long gray face rising up from manicured grounds like something built to remind visitors exactly how small they were. A footman met her at the door before she could decide whether to knock or turn back. He did not ask her name. He simply said, "This way, miss," as though she were expected, which unsettled her more than if he had questioned her at all. She was led down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, into a study where a fire burned low and orderly, nothing like the wild fires Wren lit in her own small grate. Julian Ashcombe stood by the window, his back to the door, and did not turn immediately when she entered. "You came," he said, still facing the glass. "Your note said it concerned my mother," Wren said. "I did not think I had the luxury of ignoring that." He turned then, and for a moment neither of them spoke. In daylight, without the crowd and the candlelight of the assembly hall, he looked younger than she remembered, and more tired, as if the 6 years since whatever this was about had cost him more sleep than he would ever admit. "Please," he said, gesturing to a chair, "sit." She did not sit. "I would rather stand, Your Grace, until I understand why I am here." Something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his face and disappeared just as quickly. "Fair enough." He crossed the room to a desk and opened a drawer, retrieving a folded letter, worn soft at the edges from handling. "May I ask your mother's full name?" "Eleanor Ashford," Wren said. "She died 6 years ago. Why does that matter to a man who never met her?" Julian's grip on the letter tightened just slightly, just enough that Wren noticed. "I never had the honor of meeting her, no," he said. "But my family knew her. Or rather, my family owed her something, and I only learned the size of that debt 6 years too late to pay it while she lived." Wren felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her, though she had not moved. "What kind of debt?" He did not answer right away. He set the letter down on the desk between them, but did not offer it to her yet, as though he needed one more moment before he let it leave his hands. "My father made an arrangement with your mother's family many years before you were born," he said. "A business matter, land and investment, the sort of thing men of his generation settled with a handshake and no paperwork worth trusting. When the arrangement failed, through no fault of your mother's family, my father let the blame fall entirely on them. It ruined your grandfather. It began the decline that eventually cost your mother everything, and eventually cost you everything as well." Wren's mouth had gone dry. "You are telling me my family's ruin began with your father?" "I am telling you I believe it did," Julian said. "I found proof 3 nights ago, in a letter I had avoided reading for 6 years because I did not want to know what it said. I read it the night I met you, the night I saw the ring." "The ring," Wren repeated, looking down at her hand as if she could suddenly see it differently. "It belonged to your grandmother before your mother," Julian said. "My father kept a small portrait of the two families together, taken before everything went wrong. Your grandmother is wearing that same ring in it. I recognized the stone the moment I saw it on your hand. I have looked at that portrait more times than I can count, though I never understood until 3 nights ago exactly what I was looking at." Wren sat down then, not because he had asked her to, but because her legs had stopped fully trusting themselves. "Why did you not tell me this at the assembly?" she asked. "Why send a note days later in secret instead of simply speaking to me there?" "Because what I am about to tell you is not the kind of thing that should be said in a room full of people who mock your dress," Julian said, and for the first time, something sharp entered his voice, something that sounded almost like anger, though not directed at her. "I saw how they treated you. I saw exactly what kind of room it was. You deserved better than to hear the truth about your own family surrounded by people who thought your grief was entertainment." Wren had not expected kindness from him. She had braced for pity, or worse, some transactional offer meant to quiet a guilty conscience with money and nothing more. She had not expected him to have noticed the mockery at all, let alone to be angry about it on her behalf. "What do you intend to do with this information?" she asked carefully, "now that you have it?" "I intend to make it right," Julian said, "whatever that requires." "You do not know me," Wren said. "You do not know what would make it right, or whether I even want it made right by you." "No," he agreed. "I do not know you, but I know what was taken from your family, and I know I have spent 6 years living comfortably in a house my father built partly on the ruin of yours. That is not a debt I can leave unpaid simply because it makes me uncomfortable to look at it." Wren studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the performance she was certain must be hiding somewhere beneath the words, the way Cordelia's smile had hidden cruelty beneath politeness. She could not find it. Whatever this was, it did not look like performance. It looked like a man forcing himself to say something he would rather have buried with the letter in his drawer. "I need time," she said finally. "This is not a small thing you have told me. I cannot simply thank you and walk home as though my whole understanding of my family has not just changed in the space of an afternoon." "Take whatever time you need," Julian said. "I will not press you. I only ask one thing." "What is that?" "Come back Thursday next," he said. "There is more to tell you, and I would rather tell it in pieces you can carry than all at once in a way that breaks you." Wren almost refused on principle. some old stubborn part of her that did not like being told what to do by a man with a title and a house the size of a small village. But there was something in the careful way he had said it, "breaks you," that told her he understood exactly how much weight this conversation already carried, and did not intend to add more than she could hold. "I will think about it," she said, which was not quite a yes, though they both understood it would become one. She left Renmere House the way she had entered it, on foot in the gray afternoon light, but the walk home felt entirely different from the walk there. Her mind turned over every detail of her mother's final years, the debts that had never made sense, the sudden poverty that had swallowed her family whole with no clear cause anyone had ever explained to her. She had always assumed it was simply bad luck, the ordinary cruelty of a hard world. She had never once considered that a name like Ashcombe might be written somewhere at the root of it. She did not tell Marta everything that evening. She told her only that the Duke had known her mother's family and that there was more to discuss. Marta, sharp as ever, said nothing, only watched Wren's face for a long moment before returning to her sewing, as if she had already guessed the shape of what was coming and decided it was not yet her place to say it aloud. That night, Wren took out her mother's remaining letters, the small handful she had kept through every move, every loss, every hard winter, and read them by candlelight, searching for any mention of the name Ashcombe. She found nothing directly, only vague references to a business arrangement gone wrong, written in her mother's careful hand with none of the anger Wren might have expected, only a tired kind of sadness that Wren had never fully understood until now. She thought of Julian's face when he had spoken of his father, the discomfort in it, the effort of a man saying something he clearly wished were not true. She thought of the ring on her hand, warm from years of her own skin, and wondered how many more secrets it had been quietly holding all along, waiting for the right person to finally ask the right question. Thursday next, she decided, staring at the candle flame until it burned low. She would go back. Not because he had asked her to, but because for the first time in 6 years, someone had offered her an answer instead of another closed door, and she was not willing to walk away from that, whatever it cost her to hear the rest. Thursday next arrived colder than the one before it, frost silvering the edges of the windows at Marta's shop when Wren woke before dawn, unable to sleep any longer. She spent the morning finishing 3 hems for paying customers, her hands moving through the familiar motions while her mind stayed 2 miles away, in a study with a fire that burned too orderly and a man who spoke of debts like they were living things. She arrived at Renmere House at exactly 3 o'clock, refusing to be early enough to seem eager or late enough to seem afraid. The same footman met her at the door, and this time he offered a small nod that might have been respect or might have simply been habit repeated for a second visit. Julian was waiting in the study again, though this time he was not standing at the window. He sat at the desk with several papers spread before him, and he rose the moment she entered, an old formality that felt strange coming from a man who had spoken so plainly the week before. "You came back," he said, and there was something almost relieved in it. "You said there was more," Wren answered. "I do not like unfinished things." "Neither do I," he said. "It is, apparently, the one trait we share so far." She did not smile, though something in her chest loosened slightly at the small attempt at lightness. She took the chair this time, without being asked, and folded her hands in her lap the way her mother had taught her long ago, back when sitting properly in a Duke's study had seemed like something that might one day matter to her future, rather than a strange accident of the present. Julian sat across from her, the papers between them like a small wall neither had decided to cross yet. "I told you my father made an arrangement with your grandfather," he began. "What I did not tell you is the nature of it, because I did not fully understand it myself until I spent the last week reading through every ledger and letter in this house that touches the year your family's fortunes changed." "And what did you find?" "Your grandfather was not merely a business partner," Julian said. "He was, for a time, one of my father's closest friends. They invested together in a shipping venture, cargo routes to the Indies, the kind of enterprise that could make or ruin a family depending on a single voyage. Your grandfather put in the greater share of the money. My father put in the greater share of the risk, on paper, because his name carried more weight with the merchants who arranged the routes. Wren felt her pulse quicken, though she could not yet say why. Go on. The venture failed, Julian said. 2 ships lost, one to weather, one to piracy off the coast. A common enough disaster for that kind of trade, and ordinarily the loss would have been shared according to the original agreement. But my father, facing his own debts at the time, debts from gambling he never spoke of openly, altered the paperwork after the fact. He shifted the greater share of the loss onto your grandfather's name, using a clause your grandfather had signed in good faith and never fully understood. He cheated him, Wren said, the words coming out flatter than she expected, flat the way ice is flat right before it cracks. Yes, Julian said. There was no softening in the word, no attempt to make it easier to hear. He cheated him, and when your grandfather discovered it and tried to fight the claim, my father used his influence with the merchants and the courts to ensure the fight went nowhere. Your grandfather lost the case, lost most of his fortune paying the falsified debt, and died 2 years later by all accounts, a broken man. Wren sat very still, staring at a spot on the carpet just past Julian's boots, trying to fit this new information into the shape of a family history she had only ever known in fragments. She remembered her mother speaking of a grandfather who died before Wren was born, a quiet, sad man in old portraits, and she had never once been told the reason for the sadness that seemed to follow every mention of him. My mother never spoke of this, she said finally. I do not think she knew the full truth, Julian said. I believe she only knew that her family had lost everything in a bad investment, the same story my own father told, the story he wanted told. I do not believe she ever knew the investment was not bad at all, only stolen. Stolen, Wren repeated. The word tasted strange in her mouth, heavier than the vague sadness she had lived with her whole life. You are telling me my mother spent her entire life poor and struggling because your father lied to save himself? Yes, Julian said again, and this time his voice cracked slightly at the edges, the first real break Wren had heard in his composure since they met. And I am telling you that I have lived my entire life comfortable, protected, and admired, in a house paid for in part by that theft, and I did not know it until a week ago, though I should have asked harder questions long before now. Wren looked up at him, and for a moment the anger she expected to feel toward him tangled with something else entirely, something that recognized the particular kind of grief in his face, a grief that came from discovering your own comfort had a cost someone else paid without ever being asked. Why are you telling me this? She asked. You could have burned that letter, no one would ever have known. I would have known, Julian said simply. And I think, somewhere, you would have known too, even without the words for it. You have spent 6 years wondering why your family fell so far so fast. I could not let you go on wondering when I held the answer in a drawer. The room fell quiet except for the low crackle of the fire. Wren became aware, distantly, of her own ring, the small garnet stone catching the firelight the way it had caught the candlelight the night they met, and she understood now why it had stopped him cold across a crowded room. It was not simply a pretty stone to him. It was proof, walking and breathing and standing in front of him, of everything his family had taken and never returned. What happens now? She asked. You cannot undo a theft that happened before either of us was born. No, Julian agreed, but I can return what remains recoverable. There is land, still in my family's name, that was purchased with the profits from that falsified claim. There are investments that grew from the money your grandfather should have kept. I intend to transfer what I am able to transfer, and to do it publicly enough that no one can later claim it was charity rather than restitution. Publicly, Wren said, alarm rising in her voice before she could stop it. You mean to tell the world my family's ruin, in front of everyone who already mocks me for the dress I wear? I mean to tell the world the truth, Julian said carefully, which is that your family did nothing wrong, and mine did everything wrong, and that the mockery you endured at that assembly was built on a lie my father told to protect his own reputation. I do not intend to humiliate you further. I intend to end the humiliation entirely, by making certain everyone understands exactly whose fault it always was. Ren sat with that for a long moment, turning it over, trying to find the trap in it and not quite locating one. She had spent 6 years assuming the world's judgment of her family was simply the natural order of things, poor people falling further because the world had little patience for the fallen. To hear instead that it had been engineered, deliberately, by a man whose son now sat across from her offering to unmake it, felt almost too large to hold in one afternoon. I need to think, she said again, the same words she had used the week before, though this time they carried a different weight. Of course, Julian said, take whatever time this requires. I only ask that whatever you decide it knowing the truth, rather than the story my father left behind. She rose to leave, and he rose with her, walking her to the study door himself rather than summoning the footman. At the threshold she paused, some question rising in her that she had not planned to ask. Did you know, she said, before the assembly, before any of this, that a girl named Ashford existed, working in a dress shop 2 miles from your house? No, Julian said. I did not know your name until 3 nights after I met you. I only knew, the moment I saw that ring, that something in my family's history was not what I had been told. I did not expect it to have a face. I certainly did not expect it to be yours. Something in the way he said it, quiet and unguarded, made Ren's chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with anger or grief. She left without responding, walking the 2 miles home in the fading light with her mind full of ships and lost fortunes and a dead grandfather she had never known, and underneath all of it, a strange new awareness of the man she had left standing in the doorway, watching her go. She did not notice, on her walk home, a carriage that had been waiting near the edge of the Renmere grounds since before her arrival, nor the woman inside it who watched Ren's departure with narrowed, calculating eyes. Cordelia Ashby had followed the rumors of the Duke's sudden interest in the seamstress's girl, the way she followed every piece of gossip that might affect her own prospects, and what she had seen today, a second private visit in as many weeks, told her everything she needed to know about the danger this girl now posed to plans Cordelia had been quietly building for over a year. Cordelia's family fortune, unlike Ren's, had never fully recovered from a bad decade 2 generations back, and a marriage to the Duke of Renmere had long been discussed in her household as the surest path back to the standing they had lost. She had spent months positioning herself carefully at every event he attended, waiting for the right moment, the right conversation, the right accident of timing that would finally turn his famous indifference into interest. She had not accounted for a girl in a mendied dress. As Ren's small figure disappeared down the road toward Marta's shop, Cordelia instructed her driver to take her home, her mind already working through what she knew, what she suspected, and what she might do to ensure that whatever was growing between the Duke and the seamstress's assistant did not survive long enough to matter. She did not yet know the full truth of the shipping venture or the falsified claim, but she knew enough, from careful listening at doors not meant for her, to understand that something old and buried was being dug up, and that old buried things could be turned into weapons in the right hands. She smiled to herself in the dark of the carriage, already composing the first of several letters she intended to write before the week was out. Ren, walking home unaware of any of this, thought only of ships lost at sea and a Duke's cracked voice admitting his father's sins, and did not yet know that the truth she had just learned was about to become far more dangerous than the secret it replaced. The letters Cordelia had promised herself took less than a week to reach their targets, and by the following Tuesday, Whispers had begun moving through the drawing rooms of the city faster than Wren could have anticipated. She heard the first version of it from Marta, who had heard it from a customer, who had heard it from someone else entirely, each retelling adding a small, cruel twist that had not existed in the original truth. The version that reached Wren by midweek claimed that the seamstress's girl had seduced the Duke of Renmere with a sad story about a dead mother, hoping to trick him into marriage, and a fortune she had no right to. Another version, worse, suggested that Wren had invented the entire tale of the shipping venture to extort money from a grieving, guilty man who had never actually wronged her family at all. Wren read the second version in a note slipped under Marta's door, unsigned, written in a hand she recognized from the wedding gloves she had once delivered. Cordelia. She stood in the small back room of the shop, the note trembling slightly in her hand, and felt something old and familiar rise in her chest, the same heat she had felt at the assembly when the laughter first began. But this time it did not stay simple humiliation. This time it curled into something sharper, something that steadied her instead of shrinking her. Anger, she was discovering, could be a strange kind of relief. It asked nothing of her but action. "You will not answer this," Marta said, watching Wren's face carefully from across the room. "Whatever you are thinking of doing, you will not do it by writing back to whoever sent that." "I was not thinking of writing back," Wren said, folding the note with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "I was thinking of going to see him." She did not walk to Renmere House this time. She could not afford the delay of 2 miles on foot with her thoughts moving faster than her legs could carry her, so she spent coin she did not have on a hired carriage, and arrived at the gates before she had fully decided what she intended to say once she got there. Julian was not in his study when she arrived. He was in the front hall, mid-argument with Edmund Farr, both of their voices low and urgent in the way of men trying not to be overheard by the servants standing nearby. He turned the moment the door opened and saw her, and something in his face, already tight with strain, tightened further. "You have heard," he said before she could speak. "I have heard several things," Wren said. "None of them true, all of them dangerous." "I know," Julian said. "I have spent the last 2 days trying to trace where it began." "I know where it began," Wren said. "Cordelia Ashby. She followed me from your house. She has been telling anyone who will listen that I invented your father's crimes to extract money from you." Julian's jaw tightened in a way Wren was beginning to recognize, the same stillness that had crossed his face the night they met, except now it carried a different weight, something closer to fury held carefully in check. "She has no proof of anything," he said. "There is nothing to invent. The ledgers exist. My father's own hand exists on the altered documents. I have shown Farr everything." "Proof does not matter to people who want a story more than they want the truth," Wren said, and heard in her own voice an echo of every lesson 6 years of poverty had taught her. "By the time your ledgers are examined properly, everyone in this city will have already decided who I am. A girl who traps rich men with sad stories. That is the story they want, because it is easier than believing a duke's father was a thief." "Then we correct it," Julian said, publicly, immediately before it spreads further. "And how do you imagine that will look?" Wren asked, her voice rising now, the anger she had carried in the carriage finally finding somewhere to go. "The Duke of Renmere standing up in front of society to defend the honor of a seamstress's assistant he has met exactly 3 times. Do you think that silences the gossip, your grace, or do you think it simply gives them a better story?" Julian did not answer immediately, and in the silence Wren saw something she had not expected to see in him, a flicker of the same fear she had felt walking into that assembly hall weeks ago, the fear of a room deciding who you were before you had said a single word. "What would you have me do instead?" he asked finally, quieter now. "Say nothing. Let them believe whatever cruelty is easiest." "I do not know," Wren said, and for the first time since the note had arrived, her anger cracked slightly, showing the exhaustion beneath it. "I have spent 6 years being invisible, Julian. poor enough that no one wasted their cruelty on me because there was nothing left to take. The moment you noticed me, the moment anyone noticed me, I became visible again, and visible apparently means being turned into whatever story serves someone else's purpose. It was the first time she had used his given name. Neither of them seemed to notice until the silence after it stretched a beat too long. I did not mean to make you visible in a way that hurt you, Julian said. I only meant to make things right. I know, Ren said. That is what makes this so difficult to be angry about properly. She sat down finally, uninvited, in a chair near the hall's cold fireplace, and pressed her fingers against her closed eyes for a moment, trying to steady the storm of the last hour. Julian moved to stand near her, not touching, simply present, the way a wall stands near a person who has just run into it too hard to keep standing on their own. There is something else, he said carefully. Something I have not yet told you because I did not think it mattered until now. Ren lowered her hands and looked up at him. What? Cordelia's family, Julian said, had their own dealings with my father around the same time as your grandfather's. A smaller matter, a loan my father called in early, at a moment convenient for him and ruinous for them. I found the record of it while searching for your family's papers. I do not believe it is coincidence that she has taken such a personal interest in discrediting you before the full truth comes out. Ren felt something cold settle over the anger, understanding arriving in the shape of a much larger, uglier picture. She is afraid, Ren said slowly, that if your father's dealings with my family become public, hers will be examined next, and she would rather destroy me first than risk that exposure. I believe so, Julian said, which means this is no longer simply about restitution to your family. It is about a great many old debts my father left behind, and a great many people who have built their comfort on top of them, all of whom would rather see you ruined than see the truth come out. Ren stood, the exhaustion in her replaced now by something clearer, harder, closer to resolve than despair. Then we do not correct the story quietly, she said. We do not let it stay a whisper that people choose to believe or disbelieve as it suits them. We bring all of it into the light, your father's crimes, Cordelia's family's crimes, everything, so there is no room left for anyone to twist it into a smaller, crueler shape. Julian looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, respect layering over the guilt that had lived there since the night he read his father's letter. That would cost you dearly, he said. Everyone whose comfort depends on those old secrets will turn against you the moment it happens. They have already turned against me, Ren said. They turned against me the moment I walked into that assembly hall in a mended dress. I would rather be hated for the truth than pitied for a lie. Something in the set of her shoulders as she said it reminded Julian, sharply and without warning, of the way she had stood in that hall weeks ago, chin level, eyes on the chandelier, refusing to let the room's cruelty bend her. He understood then, with a clarity that startled him, that he was no longer simply righting an old wrong. He was standing in the presence of someone he had begun, without quite noticing when it happened, to admire. Then we do it properly, he said. There is a gathering at Lady Pemberton's in 10 days, the same kind of event where Cordelia's rumors will spread fastest and do the most damage if left unanswered. I intend to make certain that instead, it is the place where the truth is finally spoken plainly, by both of us, in front of everyone who matters. Ren felt her pulse quicken at the thought, fear, and something close to anticipation tangled together. You mean to stand up in a ballroom and accuse your own father of theft? I mean to stand up in a ballroom, Julian said, and finally stop protecting a dead man's reputation at the expense of a living woman's honor. I should have done it the moment I read that letter. I delayed because I was afraid of exactly what you predicted, of making things worse instead of better. I am done being afraid of that. Ren studied him, searching once more for the trap, the performance, the convenient timing of a man's courage arriving only once his own interests aligned with it. She did not find one. What she found instead was a man who had spent 6 years comfortable and was choosing, deliberately and at real cost to himself, to stop being comfortable. 10 days, she said. Cordelia will not sit idle for 10 days. No, Julian agreed. She will not, which means we have 10 days to make certain that whatever she tries to do, the truth arrives at that ballroom stronger than any lie she can build in the meantime. Wren left Renmere House that evening with a plan taking shape in her mind, sharper and more determined than the girl who had walked in weeks ago, only wanting answers about a ring. She did not yet know exactly what Cordelia would attempt in the days ahead, or how close the coming gathering would come to unraveling everything before it could be set right. She knew only that she was done being invisible, and done being ashamed of a dress, a name, and a ring that had never once been the thing that needed hiding. Behind her, in the cold front hall of Renmere House, Julian stood alone for a long while after she had gone, staring at the door she had walked through, feeling for the first time in years something other than the careful, guarded stillness he had built his whole life around. It felt, he thought, uncomfortably like hope, and he was no longer entirely sure he wanted to guard against it. Lady Pemberton's ballroom filled slowly on the night of the gathering, candles multiplying along the walls until the whole room glowed gold, and Wren stood at its edge in a dress that was, for the first time in 6 years, entirely new. Julian had sent it 3 days earlier with no note attached, only a small card that read for the truth to be heard, not the dress, and Wren had almost refused it out of pride before deciding that refusing it would only prove Cordelia's version of events correct, that she was too poor and too proud to accept what was rightfully owed. She wore the ring on top of the new silk gloves, refusing to hide it, the small garnet stone catching candlelight the way it had the night this entire story began. Cordelia arrived an hour later, and Wren felt the shift in the room the moment she did, a ripple of attention that told her Cordelia had spent the intervening 10 days building something. She moved through the crowd with the particular brightness of a woman who believed she already held the winning hand, stopping to speak with small clusters of guests who leaned in eagerly, already half convinced by whatever she was telling them. Julian found Wren near the edge of the dance floor before the whispers could fully take shape. "She has been telling people all week that you plan to make a scene tonight," he said quietly, "claiming you intend to extort a public apology and a settlement from me by threatening to spread lies about my father." "Then let us disappoint her by telling the truth instead," Wren said, though her pulse had climbed at the sight of so many watching faces. The moment came sooner than either of them had planned. Cordelia, perhaps sensing that delay only weakened her position, moved to the center of the room herself, raising her voice just enough to draw attention without seeming to demand it, an old practiced skill. "I do think," she said, to the small crowd around her but pitched for the whole room to hear, "that everyone deserves to know exactly what kind of woman has been visiting Renmere House unaccompanied these past weeks. A seamstress's assistant, spinning tailies about old family debts, hopping a grieving duke's guilt will loosen his purse strings." The room's attention turned, exactly as she intended, toward Wren. Wren felt the old instinct rise in her, the urge to look down, to shrink, to let the room's judgment settle over her the way it always had. She thought of the assembly hall weeks ago, the laughter, the chandelier she had counted candles on rather than meet anyone's eyes. She did not look down this time. "I have not spun any tale," Wren said, her voice carrying further than she expected in the sudden quiet. "I have only listened to one, told to me by a man with proof in his own family's ledgers. Perhaps, Miss Ashby, you might explain to the room why you have taken such a personal interest in silencing me before that proof could be examined." Cordelia's smile flickered, just slightly, quickly recovered. "I take an interest because a fortune is at stake, and fortunes attract liars." "They do," Julian said, stepping forward now, his voice cutting cleanly through the murmurs that had begun rippling through the crowd. which is precisely why I have brought the ledgers with me tonight." A hush fell so complete that Wren could hear the candles hiss faintly in their sconces. Julian nodded to Edmund Farr, standing near the door with a leather case. Wren had not noticed until this moment, and Farr crossed the room to place it in Julian's hands. "6 years ago," Julian said, addressing the room now, his voice steady in a way that told Wren he had rehearsed this moment in his mind more than once over the past 10 days. "My father entered into a shipping venture with Miss Ashford's grandfather, a man named Charles Ashford, who invested the greater share of the capital in good faith. When the venture failed, my father altered the terms of their agreement after the fact, shifting the loss almost entirely onto a man who had trusted him as a friend. He opened the case and withdrew the original documents, holding them up not for the room to read, which would have been impossible at that distance, but as physical proof that the words he spoke were not invention. Charles Ashford lost his fortune fighting a claim my father had already ensured he could not win," Julian continued. "He died 2 years later, and his daughter, Eleanor, inherited nothing but debt and a ruined name, a name her own daughter has carried the consequences of every day since, including in this very room, where I watched her mocked for a dress mended by her own hands because poverty was all my family's dishonesty left her." The room had gone entirely still now, every face turned toward him, and Wren felt, for the first time in 6 years, the strange sensation of being seen not as an object of pity or cruelty, but simply as someone who had been wronged and was finally being believed. "As for Miss Ashby's family," Julian said, turning slightly toward Cordelia, whose bright composure had begun to crack visibly at the edges, "I have also found record of a loan my father called in early from her father, at a moment calculated for maximum damage. I do not raise this to shame her. I raise it because I believe it explains a great deal about why she has fought so hard these past weeks to ensure my father's dealings never came to light. Old debts, it seems, have a way of connecting more families than any of us would like to admit." Cordelia's mouth opened, closed, opened again, no ready reply arriving in time to save her from the sudden weight of every eye in the room. She had built her entire campaign on being the one who controlled the story, and in a single conversation, Julian had taken that control away from her entirely, laying bare not only the truth of Wren's family but the far less flattering truth of her own motives. "This is a private matter," Cordelia finally managed, her voice thin. "You have no right to speak of my family's business in front of all these people." "I have exactly the right you claimed for yourself an hour ago," Julian said, "when you stood in this same room and spoke of Miss Ashford's business to anyone who would listen. I only ask that the truth be given the same audience the lie was." Wren watched Cordelia's face shift through several emotions in quick succession, fury and humiliation, and something that might have been genuine fear of what came next for her own family's reputation, and felt, unexpectedly, no satisfaction in it, only a kind of tired recognition. Cordelia had spent months positioning herself the way Wren had spent years surviving, both of them caught in the wreckage of debts neither of them had created. "I do not say this to ruin you," Wren said quietly, stepping forward, surprising even herself with the words. "I say it only because I am done being ruined quietly while everyone else's reputation stays untouched. If your family's dealings with the Duke's father were as unjust as mine, you deserve to have that truth known as well. I would rather stand beside you in that than stand over you." The offer seemed to catch Cordelia entirely off guard, more than any accusation could have. For a moment, the practiced brightness fell away completely, and Wren saw underneath it a young woman as frightened of poverty and mockery as Wren herself had once been, simply better dressed while carrying it. Cordelia did not answer. She turned and left the ballroom quickly, her composure only barely holding until she reached the door, and the room watched her go in a silence that had shifted, somewhere in the last few minutes, from scandal to something closer to sympathy for the girl in the new silk dress who had just been offered kindness instead of victory. Lady Pemberton herself approached soon after, expressing the sort of careful, diplomatic regret that hostesses offered when a scandal had unfolded in their own ballroom. But underneath the diplomacy, Ren caught something like genuine respect in the older woman's eyes. "You handled that with more grace than most of the men in this room would have managed," Lady Pemberton said. "I believe you will find fewer mocking whispers waiting for you at the next assembly, Miss Ashford." "I would be grateful for that," Ren said, "though I find I mind them rather less than I used to." The remainder of the evening passed strangely, the room's attention shifting toward Ren not with cruelty now, but with a kind of careful curiosity. Guests who had laughed at her weeks ago now finding excuses to speak with her, to ask after her family, to say small, awkward things that were not quite apologies, but were trying, in their limited way, to become one. Julian found her again near midnight, by the same window where he had first told her the truth in his study weeks before, though this window looked out over Lady Pemberton's gardens rather than his own. "You surprised me tonight," he said. "I expected anger toward Cordelia. I did not expect kindness." "Anger was easier to carry for a while," Ren said. "But I have spent 6 years watching what it does to people who hold onto it too long. I did not want to become someone who needed another person ruined to feel whole again." Julian looked at her for a long moment, the candlelight from the ballroom catching the same ring that had started all of this, weeks ago, across a crowded room full of laughter. "The land transfer will be finalized within the month," he said, "along with the recovered investments. It will not undo 6 years, but it is what I am able to give." "I know," Ren said. "I am grateful for it, but I find standing here that it is not the thing I am thinking about most tonight." "What are you thinking about?" Ren considered the question honestly before answering, the way she had learned to consider most things since the night a duke first asked about a ring instead of a dress. "I am thinking that I came to your house weeks ago expecting either charity or cruelty, and found instead a man willing to lose his own comfort for the sake of a truth that cost him more than it cost anyone else in that room tonight. I did not expect that. I am still deciding what to do with it." "You do not have to decide tonight," Julian said. "No," Ren agreed, "but I find I am no longer in quite so much of a hurry to decide against it." Outside, the garden lay quiet under a clear, cold sky, and somewhere behind them the ballroom's music continued, indifferent to the two people standing near the window who had, in the space of a single evening, rewritten what an old dress and an older ring had always meant. Ren did not know yet exactly what would come next, whether restitution would grow into something more, whether the city's gossip would forgive her as easily as Lady Pemberton had suggested, or whether Cordelia's humiliation would breed a quieter, more dangerous resentment in the months ahead. She knew only that she had walked into that ballroom in a new dress and an old ring, expecting to defend herself, and had walked out instead having finally been heard, by a room and by a man who had chosen, at real cost to himself, to make certain of it. The ring caught the moonlight one last time as she turned from the window, and for the first time in 6 years, Ren thought of it not as the last surviving piece of everything she had lost, but as the beginning of everything that still remained to be decided.